How much money does an architect make? I get asked this question very often, so I've decided to finally make a video on it. You'll see over the course of this video that there isn't one answer because working in this field has many paths, so I want to show you a few paths that an architect can take and see how their salaries get affected depending on the path that they choose. To find out how much an architect makes, I'm going to go to the AIAS compensation calculator, and I'll place the link in the description of this video. The AIA stands for the American Institute of Architects, and I find that, generally speaking, their calculator is pretty accurate. Also, it's nice that they add a small description for what each of the roles in a firm does. When you click on Select a Position, you'll notice that it's organized from the least experienced at the bottom to generally the most experienced at the top. When you're in school, it's common that you start to look for a part-time job while you're attending classes. When I was in school, for example, I would work 24 hours a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays while going to classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So let's see what a recent graduate makes, and I'll let you know how accurate that is based on my experience and based on what I've seen and heard from others. I'll choose Florida because it's where I'm from. Immediately looking at the numbers, I could tell you that it's fairly accurate. Based on these numbers, keep in mind that when you start your career, you might be working part-time, so you'll be looking at making half of what it says here pretty much. Also, remember that these are averages and they're very general, so it's very common that you might meet someone who makes something completely different than what it shows here. The range goes from $49,000 on the low side to $56,000 on the high side, with $53,000 being the median. Like I said, based on my experience, this is pretty accurate for a recent graduate. Now let's go over to Architectural Staff 2, the unlicensed version. I've never heard of this exact description before in the real world, but I'm sure some firms do use it. You'll notice that under description, it says that this is someone who has around 6 or more years of work experience. The range here goes from $57,000 to $76,000. So basically, if you're making $50,000 when you first start, and then 6 years later you're making $57,000, I feel like that can be really discouraging. But if instead 6 years later you're making almost $76,000, it's not so bad. But let's remember that this is for an unlicensed person. So what if we get our license? How does that change? Again, you'll see that it's someone with 6 or more years of experience. This time though, they've obtained their license. This is totally doable, by the way. I recommend that you start studying to get licensed while in school if you can. But if you can't, then start as soon as you graduate and start taking the test immediately that same year. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, back to the salaries. You can see that just by getting your license, you've jumped up to a range between $73,000 and $87,000. So by getting your license, if you started at $50,000 as a graduate, around 6 years later, you'd be making around $73,000 on the low end and $87,000 on the high end, according to this calculator. This does not sound that bad at all, but it doesn't sound too accurate to me. Unfortunately, like I said, this position is not something I'm really familiar with. I'm more familiar with the terms drafter, job captain, designer, project architect, and project manager. But based on the experience, I feel like $65,000 to $75,000 would be more accurate of a range based on this description. But the information provided by the AIA is based on the average of all the states included in these divisions, so for the sake of the rest of the video, let's just assume it's 100% accurate. Now let's look at someone who has their license and has been working for the past 10 years. In other words, someone graduated when they were 23 years old, and now they're 33 years old, about to get a pay raise. How much would they be making? Well, the AIA considers this a senior architect, and based on their data, they should be making around $90,000 to $122,000. This is a pretty significant raise. I don't think it's bad at all, especially if you're on the higher side. The lower side, the $90,000, is kind of especially if you look at all that an architect does. More on that in a bit. Let's look at the project manager now, the person who pretty much runs the whole project. The AIA lists this role as someone who has over 8 years of experience. Based on the information here, $80,000 to $116,000 is the typical range. So it's just a bit lower than a senior architect who has just a couple more years of experience. What about those who are the designers of the project? After all, that's the reason most of us went to architecture school in the first place, to design buildings. You'll need 5 to 10 years of experience and you'll be making $72,000 to $100,000. That's not too bad, especially if 5 years after you graduate, you're making on the higher side of that range, and after all, you're doing all you've always wanted to do, which is design. After a lot of experience doing that, you could move into the position of Director of Design. I'll be honest with you, I've never met a person in my life with this role, and I've never even heard of a friend who has had this role, so I'm trusting the AIA 100% on this one. You'll probably be surprised to see that the director of design can be making a salary of $110,000 to $157,000. Now that is significant. You'll notice that there's no description to how many years of experience they typically have. I think this is because this role is simply based on talent. And not necessarily a talent you're born with, but I mean someone who has gained a lot of experience in design, paid their dues, and learned to be really good at coordinating designs and whatnot. So in other words, there's not a set amount of time it takes to get to this point. You just have to have the experience and excel at directing and managing the project's design. I'm going to skip the roles at the top because the averages start to get less accurate as you move up on the list. So according to the information provided by the AIA, you can expect to make around $50,000 as a recent graduate, and after 10 years, depending on your personal growth of course, you'll be making upwards of 6 figures. For some of you, this might be really discouraging to hear. Others may start to wonder why so many people think that architecture is underpaid when they consider these numbers to be actually good or great. Well, if you consider these numbers to be on the lower side and are wondering why architects make so little money, there's not a single reason why this is so. There's a lot of theories. Some people will tell you that architects get paid so little because they're not really needed. Architects, of course, will disagree. Others will tell you that this happens because clients have realized that they could get away with paying their architects less because of all the competition. Some will say that this is actually subjective and that architects feel this way because of the amount of work and experience they require for a set amount of compensation does not line up with the other careers that make more money with less requirements. Speaking of requirements, keep in mind that an architect needs to spend a few years and a lot of money getting their degree from an accredited school. Then they have to spend some more time and some more money buying books and other resources to study for their license. Then they have to pay to take 6 tests, and if they fail any, they have to pay again to retake them. Then of course, they need the experience to keep moving up, and as you saw in the AIA calculator, it could be over 10 years of working before you start to see some actual compensation that you're happy with. Overall, it can be quite overwhelming. Not to mention, architects are responsible for a lot of things. A project manager, for example, has to be able to communicate with clients and engineers through meetings and presentations. They have to make sure that the project is in line with the budget. They have to assign the appropriate team to the corresponding projects, and if things are not moving smoothly, they'll have to adjust as necessary. Project managers have to make sure that the projects meet codes and regulations, and they have to constantly review for mistakes in the drawings. If there are any changes, and believe me, there always will be, they have to coordinate those changes and make sure that everything else remains satisfactory. This, by the way, is just a short summary of all the tasks a project manager is responsible for. A lot of people will tell you to turn away from this career. They'll say, go and study something that will make you more money and less miserable. I, on the other hand, do not share the same idea. I think architecture is a great career. Yes, I do feel underpaid and overworked sometimes, but overall I tend to feel happy with the choice I've made. This is because when I think of other possible careers I could have chosen, architecture seems to be the one that I would enjoy doing the most over a longer period of time. Architecture is a career that teaches you to learn how to organize your time, how to be efficient, teaches you how to learn about a lot of things so you naturally become well-rounded. There's also a level of freedom I feel with architecture. What I mean is that even though I'll spend most of my time at an office, the people who surround me tend to be the type of people I really get along with, the studio environment. I also have the opportunity to travel locally and internationally on certain occasions. Even though I don't design 100% of the time, it feels like I'm creative most of the time, and that also makes me feel happy. So I feel like, yes, there are cons in terms of compensation, but overall I feel the pros really balance the experience out. So if you're someone who's thinking about becoming an architect one day, I highly suggest you don't focus on how much an architect makes. It's good to have an idea of what the compensation is at various levels, but I think you should instead focus on what architects do, what they're responsible for, and learn about all the different paths that are available. Invest your time learning about the career, learn about what an architect does, and about the future of architecture. Then use this knowledge to compare it to what you would want your life to be like in the future, and see if both visions line up. Before I end this video, I want to share a couple of important things with you. Many of you guys are probably familiar with this part, but if not, it's about all the ways we can keep connected, so you could keep learning. The first is the Pigeon Head Architecture online Revit course. It's a course I developed to help anyone who needs to start using Revit yesterday. I created it in a way that's quick, easy, and doesn't spend too much time on explaining the fundamentals of the program, but instead teaches you how to actually use the program so you can start using it immediately. Second is the Discord chat. This is perfect for anyone who has questions about the field or school or pretty much anything that has to do with architecture. It's a really cool community and we welcome any questions, comments, doubts, and even work. That's right, we have a chat room that's made specifically so you can share your sketches and or projects and receive feedback. It's really cool. We also have a Reddit page. It's important to note that this page is available for you guys, but currently does not have that many members, so if you ask a question or post a discussion topic, chances are it won't be as active as the Discord chat is. I still created it though because eventually, once enough people join, I think it'll be a good resource for you guys as well. Additionally, we have the Instagram page. This is not the most active Instagram page on the planet, but it's one of the best ways, beside the Discord, to get in contact with me. Also, I plan on adding behind the scenes content for these videos on that page, so check it out. Finally, I don't know if you've noticed, but I answer the majority of comments left on my videos, and yes, even on the older videos. I check my comments often, and when I get a notification for a new one, I usually respond. So leaving comments on these videos is actually a great way to get in contact with me as well. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you down in the comments.